Welcome to the latest edition of the East Flank podcast. Today we are discussing the EU's defense clause, aka the Article 42.7 and wider security context on the eastern flank. When EU leaders gathered for their informal summit in Cyprus in April, Article 42.7 of the Treaty on European Union was on the table for the first time. The clause obliges every EU member state to provide aid and assistance by all means in their power if another is the victim of armed aggression. However, the EU has no real experience in using it. It has been invoked exactly once, in 2015, when France activated the clause after the terrorist attacks in Paris. But even then, the mechanism produced no coordinated EU response. Times are changing, and the EU is now discussing how the clause can be used in practice. A handbook is being drafted. There was also a so-called table read in early May, when ambassadors of the member states conducted a closed 3-hour simulation on various scenarios. The goal was to test how Article 42.7 would be activated in practice, who coordinates, what tools are available, and to identify gaps. And we wanted to join the discussion as well. Joining me today, Filip Slastovskis from Delphi, Latvia, and Catalina Mihai from Romanian Media Express. My name is Ondřej Plevák and I represent the Czech Media Update EU. In our May joint article, which is in the link under the podcast, we found that the EU's defense clause has not yet been a widely discussed topic within the countries of the eastern flank, unlike in Brussels. In Latvia, security experts are beginning to talk about it, while in the Czech Republic, no one is discussing it. The situation is similar to Romania. So, Catalina, how do you explain that the article is not a public topic in your country and that even the president does not want to talk about it? Is it out of fear of what this discussion might mean for the relations with the US and their potential reluctance to help Europe within NATO, or is it something else? We have heard recently that Donald Trump wants to downsize the military help for Europe in case of an attack.
In this case, I don't think it has to do with the US and our special relation with them. Nikushordan won the election a year ago with a reformist agenda in the justice system and in society in general. And one of his promises was that he wants a bigger role for Romania in the EU and in the region to be the second power after Poland. But again, after a year in office, we don't see any of these promises. One explanation is that he lacks experience in European affairs. He is for sometimes in politics, but he's passionate about local administration. He was elected mayor of Bucharest twice. I'm not sure how much he understands about European affairs, whether he likes it or not. It's something on Europe's Day. He had a reception, but he cancelled. President of the European Parliament, Metsola, was invited, but a few days before the 9th of May, he cancelled the whole thing. And he had a speech, a very strange one. He criticized Europe for all kinds of things. One of them was heavily criticized after that. He said that Europe has made many mistakes. For example, he abandoned nuclear power. And experts in Romania tried to explain to them that it wasn't a European decision, but some EU member states decided to abandon nuclear power, like Germany. But he also said a true thing, that there is no public debates on European issues in Romania, which is true, but I think he could be the one to start these debates, because as I wrote in our joint article, he only mentioned the Article 4.27 only before the summit in Cyprus, and then nothing, even though Romania is very close to the conflict zone, sharing a long border with Ukraine, over 600 kilometers. My opinion is that we haven't yet learned to embrace our European destiny, because we still talk about Brussels as if it were a foreign entity. And I think this is to blame for politicians, because they spend so many years saying at important TV station that EU is to blame for that decision, but it wasn't true, of course. But it was easier for them to blame the EU, and well, people begin to believe them. You know, if you tell a lie over and over, it became something else.
And do you think that that is the reason why Romania is still seeking to strengthen a strategic partnership with the US? Other states talk more about Europe needing to be more autonomous, for example.
Yeah, but in Romania, we still think that Americans are our best allies. Even in the National Defense Strategy, which was adopted at the end of last year, it said clearly that Romania will remain a steadfast advocate of the strategic partnership with the United States. And yesterday, that's a big news. The presidential administration announced that it had signed a lobby contract with a law and consultancy firm to receive help in relationship with the US government and Congress. I mean, it's a contract worth over $500 million per month, and it lasts for at least 6 months. For us, the announcement was surprising. I know that other countries like Poland have such contracts, but we don't think that the timing is right, given that the midterms are taking place in the US this year. And he didn't explain again too much about this contract, what they want to achieve.
Coming back to the Article 42.7, Czechia and Latvia, as well as many other states, as we learned from the COLAB, they are proceeding cautiously and frame the clause as complementary to NATO rather than an alternative to it. But besides trying not to anger Donald Trump, the reason may lie in the fact that the EU just don't have the same operational structures as NATO. I was talking to Matuš Halas, a senior researcher at the Institute of International Relations, Prague. He mentioned that on paper, the Article 42.7 is in fact stronger than the Article 5 of the Washington Treaty, but in practice, it is just not. According to him, the crux of the credibility problem in this article lies in the fact that the EU lacks command and control system capable of implementing the activation of this article in the event of a need for mutual assistance and collective action. The question now is what the clause can do, what it enables us to do, in what ways we can react. Philips, Latvian foreign minister, emphasized that the clause should retain, I quote, maximum flexibility. What might something like that look like?
Firstly, it is a signal to partners in US. There is no doubt about that. We are still very strong on our positions in cooperation with Americans, and that's why we hear those remarks about, for example, maximum flexibility or something like that. That could mean by that, and I am interpreting myself, is that, for example, if some security threat is on place, then member states are not obliged by military treaty, but still have this clause flexibility on decision and input what they are making. We know that for so far only once, I think, this clause have been activated in 2015 in France, and also at that time France did it to justify its military presence on streets by themselves. But so that was their decision how to use this act in their benefit. How that would look from, for example, from Latvian side, if the French would ask help them to go to the Paris, they would go, but that would still be our choice on the level what we are giving there. But this is not the reason. I think that the reason is not that we wouldn't be ready to support our partners in France, but that would be still the main reason is that in our heads the military treaty is only one, and it's NATO. And I think from Latvian side, it's very important to us that because we are like living next to Russia, and so we are looking to this more carefully, I think.
And what possible scenarios or situations do in Latvia are mentioned in Latvia that could be the reason the clause is used in the future?
Like most likely something with hybrid threats, hybrid attacks, something with drone surveillance or anti-drone capabilities, something that is not just conventional warfare as it's sometimes connected with NATO, but more with some broader context defense capabilities, in also in cooperation in security services exchange, maybe it's cyber attacks in those. It is a little bit confusing because none of these things what I am mentioning right now, they are not excluded in among NATO cooperation. We would ask, and it's already happening. Like we NATO countries are already supporting with intelligence and information each other. But this is maybe to clarify the positions and distinction that this EU clause is not the same as NATO, that we are not excluding that. And of course, keeping in mind all the time how to speak and how to give signals and messages to US.
That is exactly what is mentioned in other Eastern Flank states as well. Now, I would like to talk to you about what threats are currently of greatest concern to your countries, and in what way you might benefit from the EU defense clause in the future when the handbook is ready. Is it physical threats, borders, drones, hybrid threats, as you mentioned, cyber attacks, or, for example, disinformation campaigns? If I start in Czechia, we don't have big problems with drones on our territory, and also our borders are connected to other EU members. But we have had several instances of infrastructure sabotages, attacks on ammunition depot, on bus terminal, also cyber attacks on hospitals and similar problems. What about Latvia, Philips? What problems do you have of this kind?
We have a lot of problems. Of course, we recent 3 months we have seen several drones that have felt in Latvia, and it's nobody have. We don't have any casualties right now, and those drones have felt. They felt in some fuel depot or in lake or in some forest area. But of course, this is the thing for the last few months that the drones are coming here, and we have these cell broadcasts almost every week that some drones have been noticed in Latvian airspace. All of those things, they are somehow primarily in our, of course, in our own hands and in our cooperation with already existing partners what we have, with those ties what we have in the same NATO or in some Baltic format. We have our policies, how we are acting. It's a little bit hard to find explanation why. Firstly, nobody in Latvia knows what it is. It is something that is for most of the people they don't know what this clause is, and it sounds as a formality and a technicality to start to mention not only NATO or our own capabilities, but some bureaucratic new clause, even if it is not new, but it's not have been in a public sphere and in communication and debate. So I believe it would even make bigger confusion. So how to communicate it and how to get benefit of it in the best sense, I actually don't know. But it's clear that those threats that we have right now, they are very real, and we have this information that is not just on elections but all the time. We will have elections this year, and of course, it's some kind of risk zone, very specific. We don't know even what more operations are happening right now in Latvia, maybe in some, I don't know, some political influence or what. So a lot of things we would need assistance, but most primarily in Latvian case, we need to together ourselves, not to rely on some EU clause. Of course, we need to understand what it is and how we could use that, but it's not clear at this point how exactly that would work out.
And what is the situation like in Romania, Catalina? What are the biggest threats that you are facing?
Well, the drones are of great concern, obviously, maybe because they are the most visible ones. In the first years of the war, the phenomenon was not so visible, but last year, 13 drones entered Romanian space, and this year we have already 16. And until now, they have fallen in uninhabited areas, and yeah, we have no casualties, but last month, a drone with explosives crashed into a residential building. We don't have a strategy. I think last week in Estonia, a Romanian pilot downed a drone. It was Ukrainian, but nevertheless. But in Romania, they don't do that. I mean, it's a political decision, and obviously, they don't want to, I don't know, to escalate things, I suppose. That's the general impression. We don't want to upset the Russians. So we see them and, okay, it's a drone. So let's move on. But also, hybrid threats and disinformation on social media are of concern. But again, Romanian authorities seem overwhelmed. They recognize that the speed and intensity of hybrid threats have increased in recent years. But again, we don't have a strategy to counter them or an agency to deal with them. For example, the Republic of Moldova has such an agency, and I think a collaboration would have been good because the experts say that the Russians see Moldova and Romania as a bloc. It's the same language, so it's easy for them to launch as much disinformation as possible to overwhelm the public's attention.
Would you both say that your countries are relying too much on the safety net, as you mentioned, of various forms of assistance provided by allies, by the EU and or NATO, and that they just are not ready on their own? Would you say that, Philips?
Are we relying too much? I don't know. Is this possible to answer? From one side, yeah, maybe. We have to keep in mind that what is our scale in in size and what we can realistically do. And maybe it's just reasonable that we can't do everything and that we don't have to be worried that we are like working together with partners. I think that's reasonable and okay. Maybe the main problem is what do you with your own resource, and can you are you rational and efficient in your own work being done? And that is the part where Latvia we could look at in two parts. In one part would be that we are trying very hard to impress US and also to work with our defense percentage of GDP. And in this sense, we are one of the leaders in NATO. We are 4.9 this year, and next year we will be more than 5% of GDP for defense. But this is only one thing, because you can try and impress yourself or your partners and that you can manage to get these 5%. That's great. But the second is that what you are doing with those 5%. And that is the point where there are a lot of unanswered questions right now in Latvia and maybe distrust in how we are managing this money.
And what about Romania, Catalina? What is the situation like in your country in connection to this safety net or relying too much on partners?
Yeah, like in Latvia, it's the same situation. We rely too much on cooperation with partners in the EU and NATO, and we always look for the assistance of our allies. Last week, Foreign Minister Wanatsoy announced after the meeting of NATO foreign ministers that Romania will host a NATO conference in Bucharest in October to outline a more coordinated NATO response to hybrid threats.
There is another question I wanted to discuss with you, and that's how has the issue of security and defense influenced political development in your countries in recent years? We touched upon it a bit in this podcast. In Czechia, I would not say the government changed because of security reasons, but it is certainly true that the current government of Andrej Babiš does not place as much emphasis on security and defense. It is cutting spending and eliminating various departments in the government that deal with the security. So, what about Romania, Catalina? How the security developments affected the political scene?
The new situation was not sufficiently explained, and even now the authorities have not understood that greater transparency is needed. And this vacuum of information has been filled by propaganda from both within outside and within the country. And this has led to the rise of the far right, definitely. Because it was also a precarious economic backdrop. We have had a budget deficit for years, and there is a lot of dissatisfaction regarding the budget, especially for education, healthcare, but also other sectors. And it's necessary for the allocations for security and defense to be better explained. So now the consequence is that the narrative is that we don't have money for education because we are given lots of money to the Ukrainians, which is not true, obviously. The sum is, I don't know, around 1.5 billion euros, it isn't that much, but the propaganda says, oh, we gave 50 billions or something like that. And now we have parliamentary elections in 2028, but polls show varying figures regarding the rise of far right. I mean, they could at this moment reach 50%. which means that they can form a government alone. But we'll see. We'll have 2 more years.
And what about Latvia, Philips? What is the political development regarding security topics?
It's messy. It's very messy, as I said previously. That one thing is to have this number from GDP, but second is how we are managing it. And this was the reason why in middle of May defense minister resigned. There's discussion, did he resign? Prime minister fired him, but nevertheless he was out of government. And only small amount of time later a prime minister resigned herself. And it all happened after those drone attacks, and there is a huge political pressure in society why we can't shoot down those drones, and those drones are falling down or they are having some crash somewhere, but we haven't shot down none of them. And that was a huge political pressure to the defense minister, and afterwards it also came to the resignation of prime minister. But of course it's not only the only reason why such a government change happens, because meanwhile there are toxic relationship in coalition besides defense events. So yeah, but there have been very direct impact, and it's tragic in that sense, because if those drones that are coming in Latvian territory and falling down and attacking in some instances, then Russia can relatively easily make political government change and mess in our country without a lot of effort. They are sending few drones, we can't shoot them down, and government are resigning. Our defense minister is out. So this is one perspective that is very unhealthy from one side. But of course, if we look at Latvian society, then we can't connect everything with Russia. We also have to look at our own, how why did we didn't shoot the drones down, how we are communicating with society about this. Maybe we are not good at this point and the change was needed. This is also a perspective. In any way, it's very active time right now in Latvia, as the new government in end of May right now in a process of forming. We still do not have existing government. We have the president have nominated new prime minister, and the new government will be more oriented to right side, and the previous government were more oriented to left. So this is something that have changed, and during those drone attacks and also because of them.
Last question from me. Do your countries consider Europe ready for a big conflict, Philips? What does your country think?
If you would ask for Latvian defense publicly, of course, the answer would be yes. We are trying to embrace confidence that what we can do and what we can't do. But it's clear that we are not ready for those drone attacks. And I think not only Latvia, and that or we have increased our GDPs, but we still, I think, not only in Latvia, don't know in border zone how to defend and react ourselves. And this is one part. Second part is this insecurity and unclear situation with the US and Donald Trump, these discussions about clause, and it sounds more as a diplomatic or political developments, not as with real decisions that would strengthen our defense positions right now. So, are we ready for what? For what is meant by this? For example, big conflict or big war, or how do you think like that? If Russia would start with a full invasion to Baltic countries or something like that, I think that we have our cards what to play and how to defend ourselves, but it would be extremely difficult, and of course we would lose some territory in beginning. And even if we have this NATO statement and policy that we are defending NATO from the first inch, but at this point, as we are seeing what is happening with drones, we haven't defended it already. It's not clear what would be that start of invasion. And while we would discuss was that invasion or was not, it would already taken place. That is my concern in this.
Catalina, what does Romania think in this regard? Is Europe ready for an bigger scale invasion, for example?
No, definitely not. Neither the population nor politicians, analysts consider that Romania or Europe are ready for a big conflict. I have read some analysis and they didn't say otherwise. So no, Europe is not ready, for short. Recently, former President Traian Băsescu said that Europe could be ready in 5-7 years, but only if it manages to arm itself and revitalize its defense industry. And the analysts say the same thing. Yeah, maybe in 7 years, but now definitely not.
For Czechia, I would say that the current government does not want to talk about it much and is pretending that everything is more or less fine. The Prime Minister Andrej Babiš has long advocated for a peaceful solution to the war in Ukraine and opposes Europe's direct involvement, for example, in the conflict. He says instead of escalating the situation and expanding military aid, he often calls for diplomatic negotiations. So that's from my side. So, thank you very much for this discussion, dear colleagues, and thank you all for listening. Hope you enjoyed our content and will join us next time. The next edition of the East Flame podcast will come in a month. Thank you and goodbye.